Hola students, today we're going to talk about solving equations with multiplication and division. Now, what are we trying to accomplish when we have an equation like 3n equals 12? Well, we just want to figure out what 1n equals. And that's the idea here. So, all you have to do in your mind, if you have 3n, remember 3n is the same as saying 3 times n. So, if we want to divide, right, 3 divided by 3, of course, that is just going to give us what? The 1n that we're looking for. And that's exactly what we want. So, in this case, it's a very simple problem. We divide by 3, we get 1n, and we do that on both sides of the equal sign. We always do the same thing on both sides of the equal sign. All right, let's take a look at the second problem. Here we have a variable over a number. And in this case, very similar idea of what's happening here. We want to get down to just 1k. And how do we do that? Well, remember, if we have k over 2, we can break it into a number. And remember, because this is like 1 times k, we can just break it into numbers. And the number in this case would be what? 1 over 2 times k, because when we multiply numerators. So we could kind of put this back together if we wanted to. So 1 times k over 2, and that of course is just k over 2. That's a quick review of all the little parts and pieces. So the only way to get, let's say I'm going to erase this, only way to get just 1k would be to multiply the 1/2 times what? Well, if you said 2 over 1, okay, 2 times 1 is 2, 1 times 2 is 2, and there we go. 2 divided by 2 is 1. Another way of writing 2 over 1, of course, is just 2. There we go. So it's a long-winded version, but that's exactly what they did. Okay, they multiplied by 2 on both sides, and we have 1k equals 32. So let's take a look at a couple other problems that might be slightly more difficult, but we'll walk through it pretty slow, and hopefully it'll make sense. Now, in this case, same idea. We have negative 1.5 equals 10m, but we want to know what only m equals, not 10m, 1m. So to do that, we of course have to divide both sides by 10. And the 10 divided by 10 gives us the 1. Beautiful. Now we have to do the division problem though. So here we have a negative divided by a positive. We know that our answer in this case will have to be negative. Okay, that's number 1. That's step number 1. But before we do that, let's do the division problem. So 1.5 divided by 10. Remember, you always will just bring up the decimal point and put that on the line. Please do that. Make sure you get the problem right. That's what we're after here. And we have to have our decimal point come straight up to this line. So does 10 go into 1? No. So we want to put a 0. Does 10 go into 15? Yes, 1 time. And we have 5 left over. Remember, if we have a remainder, we're going to add a 0, bring it down so we can continue our problem. Does 10 go into 50? Yes, 5 times. So negative divided by positive does give us the negative, and we have 0.15. And there's our answer. All right, let's take a look at this next problem. b divided by 3.5 equals 0.135. So following what they did over here, to make this go to just 1b, we're going to multiply 3.5 by both sides, okay? And now we have to do the problem. Well, what happens here? These factor, or really, we end up saying 3.5 over 3.5 times b. But remember, this just gives us 1b. And when we have to do this problem, I already set it up. Remember with decimals and you're multiplying, I would advise put the decimal number that has the most whole numbers on top, and then the least whole numbers second on the bottom. Why? Because this will just make it easier when you're going through the multiplication. 3 times 5 is 15. 25 plus 1 is 26. 5 plus 2 is 7. right? Our placeholder, and then 3 times 3 is 9. 3 times 5 is 15. 3 plus 1 is 4. Now we're going to get our answer. So we got 5, we get 15, we get 12, 13, and we get 5. Now, how many decimal places do we have? Well, we have 3 in this and 1 in this, so we add them up, and that's how many decimal places you will have to have in your answer. 3 plus 1 is 4. So remember, you start on the far right, and you go over 1, 2, 3, 4, and there we go. That's where our decimal place goes. So in the end, come back over here. In the end, we get B equals 0.5355. Let's take a look at a second example. Here we have 3/4 times x, or 3/4 x equals 2. Please do not forget, 3/4 x, it means that this number, this fraction, is being multiplied by x. Now, same thing with all of these problems. We want to find a way to make x equal something. So we don't want 3/4 x. We want 1x, or just x, right? So what do we multiply the 3/4 by? Well, hopefully you know this, you remember this. Why? Because it's so useful, the reciprocal. So let's get started with that. What is the reciprocal of 3/4? And if you said 4/3, you're correct. All we're doing is simply flipping the fraction, okay? Denominator goes to numerator, right? Numerator goes to denominator. So that's the idea. That's all we're doing here. We're going to go 4/3, and that's going to just go down to 1x, and we'll do the same thing on the other side, the equal sign. So just to finish this problem off, remember, anytime you have a whole number, it's the numerator times the numerator, okay, for this. And we'll do 2 times 4 is 8 over 3. So x equals 8 over 3. There we go. Now, let's take a look at this other problem here. This one is slightly more complicated. You have a negative 3/5, and the way that they wrote this, remember, a negative divided by a positive is a negative. So you can write this problem either like this or like this. I prefer the way I wrote it on the right, but it's the same thing. So if we have negative, I'm going to write it like this, negative 3/5 x equals 2, and we want this to go to just a positive 1. Remember, we want 1x. How do we do that? Well, what is the reciprocal of negative 3/5? The reciprocal will also be negative, and we would just flip the numbers. So it's the same idea up here, but we had a positive 3/4. The reciprocal is positive 4/3. So that's what we're going to do. And I'm going to actually use parentheses. Anytime I have negatives, I'm going to actually use parentheses. I think it just makes it a lot easier. So in this case, we have negative 5/3. Let me get that out of there. Times negative 3/5. And then I'll do the same thing over here. Negative 5/3. So the good thing is this goes to just 1. So we have our x. And in this case, remember, if you need to write it as a fraction to make it make more sense, go right ahead and do that. Because that's really what it is. This whole number 2 can be written as 2/1. So we have a positive times a negative. So we know our answer will be negative 2 times 5, numerator times numerator, denominator times denominator. There we go, negative 10/3. It's the same thing they have over here, so it must be right.